All right. Hello, everyone. It's Measured Response, episode 4. We've got a pretty packed episode today. I'm really excited. We've got a bunch of people on the line. We've got some pre recorded questions. And, if you've got questions in the chat, feel free to fire them off. It probably won't get a super long answer. And if you want to have a question answered, either coming on call or sending us a voice memo or just writing a text question, you should follow the link that I am posting into chat now to join the Measured Response Discord. I should introduce myself. Hello, everyone. I'm Jeff, also known as Ysengrin. I am the head of NSGOP, involved in NSG leadership in a couple of other ways, and a semi-competitive Netrunner player. And I am going to say at this point mostly former playtester. Safer, do you want to say hi to everyone?
Hi, I'm Safer. I'm head of the NSG dev team and the SBT/Formate curation team, and general game designer and lover of Crim.
Fantastic. I probably we shouldn't introduce ourselves at the top of every episode. I feels like it's been weeks since we've done it, even though I'm pretty sure it has just been a calendar week. So that's how it goes, I
feel
guess.
like we just have to do a new factoid about ourselves each time, and then it works, you know?
That's fair. I can't think of a good factoid, so that's gonna hamper me a little bit. But
I mean, look, this week was lover of Crim. Next week will be, HB enjoyer. Week after that, we'll see.
sounds good. All right, well, we've got a pretty packed episodes, but I guess before we start, anything you're excited to like? I don't know. Any fun thing happened in the last week since we recorded that you feel like talking about? I should have asked about this beforehand, so I wouldn't be ambushing you with this question. But
Oh, it's fine. I just wish I could remember what happened in the last week, which maybe says a lot.
yeah.
I think. Oh, actually, I had a really good play test on one of the newer game design projects that I'm working on like Friday.
That's
That
sick.
Yeah, it was a great moment where I was like, I think this is gonna work. Oh, I think this is probably gonna work. I, you know, sketched it out, brought it to a play test, and it was like, yeah, it works. And that's just never happens.
That's
So it's
great.
great when it's done.
I
Yeah.
need to finish the playtest files that I'm working on and put. Literally, the thing that's stopping me right now is putting like icons on the cards for the art, and it's like it is just a task that's gonna take me 10 minutes, and I just haven't done it for like 2 weeks straight. So,
I've got
uh,
I've got a Noun Project subscription for 4 icons if you need some
I've got
icons.
I've got I've got good icon resources for free at the moment. It is literally just
Uh,
downloading and naming them correctly so that my script to put them all together works so nicely. I also had a great play of John Company, which I pulled out and was like, I'm pretty sure you guys aren't going to like this, but I never get people willing to play this game. So we'll play the first round and we can call it. And we played through the whole thing. So that was a lot of fun. Uh,
Name a
so
more dynamic duo, John Company and Jeff teaching people how to play.
uh, all right. Well, we've got, as I said, a bevy of questions, and they're even kind of set up today. So I think a couple of them are going to lean into a couple of different themes. So I figured we should start first with Wentagon, who comes to us with this question. Please work.
Okay, so here's the first one. Tentative title is NRDB a good thing? Assuming you could build your own decks the same way and search cards in the same way, would you rather live in a world where there's no deck sharing or net decking at all on NRDB, or stick with the status quo? Or put differently, do you ever wish that ideas for the best decks were slower to propagate and refine through the community? Would you find the game more or less interesting if everyone's decks were a little rougher around the edges?
So yeah, I guess like that. There's like there was sort of two questions in there, and it's I think it's like the finishing question is like, would you prefer if people's decks were more rough around the edges? I think actually my answer right now, at least where I am in my Netrunner journey, is no. I think it's like it's so easy. I when I show up to my meetups, like there's a range of of skill, and it sometimes just feels bad. But it's like, oh, I brought my deck that like I've got years of deck building practice, and I know what's gonna work and what's not. To show up and just be someone like, oh, you just don't quite yet know how to deck build, and I think that like that element of NetrunnerDB is such a big benefit for the community as a whole, where you can still do creative things, and but like you have a resource to go and learn from, which I don't know was huge for me. Kind of going from like casually playing this game in the dorm room with some of with my classmates to going out to meetups. Like NetrunnerDB was a part of that journey for me. So
I think like it's like a mixed bag where I have like such fond memories of 2014, 2015, where no one knew what they were doing and everything worked because no one knew what they were doing. Um, and how I felt like you could come up with like some sort of like janky deck concept and clicking for credit could be the right thing to do in a lot of situations. So I have like a lot of nostalgia for that, but part of me thinks like this is one of those like questions where like it sounds good in practice, but it's because you're looking back on things with like 2020 like vision now, right?
yeah,
Where it's like you have to accept that if we were to be in a situation where deck ideas propagated less slowly and you didn't have things like NRDB, then people's understanding of the game wouldn't be as good as it is currently. And you might have like, I don't know, you might have like a single player who just like remains at the top and is clearly the best player. And, you know, it's not even necessarily like that would be like a bad thing, but things would just end up being different. So it's like, it's hard to isolate it, and be like, oh, well, this would definitely be like better or more enjoyable because it comes with its own association of like downsides. Um, that said, my favorite time to play Netrunner is usually when a set comes out because there's like I just get a lot of enjoyment from the experimentation that's
hmm
going on and exploring all of this stuff. And I think that's the closest that we get to that is like times in the meta right now when things are undiscovered. But I think honestly, it's like I want all of it. It's like I want to have times when the meta's non-discovered. I want to have like your cases where I had so much fun playing in like refined alco lists
yeah,
last year, where it's like we both know exactly what our decks are. We know exactly what the cards are there to do and like the choices that we've made. And we're just sitting here to like really get super deep into like this game, like this one particular matchup in this game. Like both are enjoyable, and I think it's great that we get to experience both of these things.
yeah. I think it's also worth saying. I think the network community underexplores the card pool a little bit. Like we have now had multiple years in a row where like Worlds comes around and someone is piloting a brand new deck at like top 16s or top 32s, and then like a few months later it just is the deck in the format. And like obviously ban lists end up always changing that story a little bit. Um, I do wonder a little bit if like we're in this weird middle size where it's like there's enough competitive pressure where people aggregate on stuff to succeed now because there's prestige in doing it. Because if like, oh, if we were much smaller, there's less like if Netrunner was like half the size or less or whatever, like the community would be much more like, oh, look at this cool thing I'm doing, right? And then it's like, oh, well, now there's some prestige, there's some prizes, like there's fun, there's incentives to do well, and so I should take the strong decks that I know work. And it's like, oh, when you get to a little bit, like I'm like, oh, when you go to an even larger size, there's room for strong players to say, oh, my competitive advantage is not going to come just from playing the best decks, it's going to be from being innovative. And I think there's also some stuff to do with how frequently card releases are, and like I think if sets were coming out faster than NSG can currently sustain, like it would be a very different feeling. Like the game would feel more like that 2014, 2015, where things don't get optimized because there isn't time to optimize everything and disseminate everything. So I that's almost the thing I feel like is the maybe the thing I would miss more than the NRDB deck list sharing. But
Yeah, I think it's also fun to like share deck lists with people and like
yeah,
collaborate and try to build things, and
yeah,
probably just wouldn't happen without NRDB. So
yeah, or it would do the other upside of NRDB being so public is that you don't like it worked. It helps like testing groups exist. I think like I am in a testing group. Safer, you're in it with me. Like I think testing groups have good. They do interesting things where they let people like cook and try things and like do innovative stuff. But I think as a whole, like if there was no public NRDB, like you would be so lost without testing groups. And NRDB does allow people that are not part of a clique to get access to some of the best stuff out there. And I think that's an important thing too. So,
yeah.
But our next question, it comes to us from Cyber, and it also has to do with meta knowledge and deck knowledge. And so I felt like it made sense to line these two back to back. So, Spider, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit and then hit us with your question?
Yeah. Hey, Jeff. Hey, Safer. Spider here. I run the Maker's Eye. I'm part of Meeting of Minds, representing the ATL meta, and I'm also part of NSU Web Dev, though I will disclose, or rather disclaimer, that everything I say on this podcast is not representative of anything NSU Web Dev is planning on doing. It's just my own personal thoughts.
Yeah, no, that's
Welcome on.
and I will say like having read your question, I will say explicitly up front like I will also say this is my personal thoughts and this is going to talk on OP stuff. It is not going to be OP policy. It might be stuff I'm going to advocate for within OP, but it's going to be something that we're going to, it is not this is the word of OP and NSG going forward. This is going to be my opinion on these things. So.
Everything I say
Cool.
here is my opinion on these things because
Yeah.
people have different opinions, game design stuff all the time. So
yeah, that's true. That's true.
yeah, it's just a universal thing.
Yeah. So now with plenty
Awesome.
of warning caveats in the way, let's go into your question. I thought it was a pretty interesting one.
Yeah, so on the Maker's Eye, we aggregate data, or rather, I aggregate data from tournaments based on identity. So, matchup stats, how well did identity A do versus identity B, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of limitations around that. So, for example, an identity can support multiple archetypes. I have generally believed that instead of just ID-based level analysis, we should do some kind of archetype level or card level analysis, which I think would be more representative of matchups, help us have a better understanding of the meta, etc. So we don't have great visibility into this. It's basically only top cuts sometimes, and ABR claims sometimes. So my proposal, among others, would be to basically publish all deck lists always for all competitive events. There's kind of a sliding scale here of different possibilities. I've heard, all lists are public before or after each tournament, after each tournament wave. So like after districts or after megacities, etc. That sort of thing. So I guess the first question is like general thoughts on archetype level analysis or like card level analysis. Are there any concerns about, balance, OP, dev stuff?
I mean, I think that this is like I I don't know, you're really speaking to the choir here on this one when it comes to like IDs are not archetypes. I think that's like a thing that I just remember people within SBT years ago. I think when I was not even in SBT, like having conversations with folks and people being like frustrated about how people talk about like an ID like it is a holistic like, oh, Hoshiko was X, Y, or Z. It's like there's 3 different versions of Hoshiko, all with their own different tech choices. Like, how in the world are we lumping all of these together? And I think I think it's mostly like a disservice, like yes to like the stats thing, but then also to like the nuances of like players' deck choices and like optimizations and all that jazz. Like the people that are in the know are in the know, but if you're just didn't have the time or have tuned out for things or you're learning the game, it's like I just don't think you can say, oh, Hoshiko in totality and all variants of Hoshiko or whatever have this win rate into this corp.
Yeah,
I just think there's like a lot of nuance that's missed.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, it's not as relevant today, but like there was, I want to say back in like 2020. Oh no, I'm not going to remember the exact year. Maybe it was 2023 or 2022. You had, it must have been 23. You had like Mulch Hosh, Reg Hosh, and like a different Reg Hosh that were all equally viable and like all had good win rates, and people were arguing about which one was the best. And when you're only like, you just had to hope that people, like, you had to based on players' vibes, if they didn't publish a deck list, which version of Hosh they brought. And it was like really, really a weird time to talk about the meta and discuss what was like the best runner deck, because the limited metadata we have right now just disappeared. So, I think from my perspective, like, I think archetype level analysis, like, a lot of times it is just kind of okay, yeah, 23 Barcelona's mulch deception. So I think this must have been like early 24 then or something. But yeah, it's, I don't, to me, archetype, like, there are a decent amount of cases where right now archetype level analysis, like, I'm not, there are multiple PD decks right now, but like there's not multiple LEO decks. So I'm not worried about like balance level concerns from that. I think there's probably some stuff that I think would be really interesting of like, are there cards that high placing Leos tend to play more than low placing Leos? And we have data, we don't even have data that can get us close to answering that question at the moment. Oh yeah, some of them are calling out Ob as like, yeah, Ob has had a bunch of different ways to play, and like saying Ob win rate is X is often reductive because it's 3 different Obs doing stuff.
Yeah, and I want to speak a little bit more to like the card choices that players can make within lists and how, you can switch out one card for another and it can actually completely flip like a winning matchup to like a losing matchup to like a winning matchup. Like, I don't know. I think that we can all think of back to a time where you sit down across the table from another player in closed deck lists and you see their identity and you go, let's say that it's against Dob, and you're like, if they're on 3 Exma virus, I have to play this entirely differently than if they're on like 1 Exma virus.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing where not just within the archetype, but within individual card choices, I think it's really we lose even more nuance and on things. And I don't know if we have like a critical mass of like data to make great assumptions or intuitions about matchups when there's archetypes, let alone like this one player brought Tuma virus, or these 3 players at Worlds brought 3 virus, and these 4 players brought Tuma virus. Like, there's so much other stuff going on. I'm not sure that we can like make great assumptions or conclusions based off of just tournament results data, because I just don't think it's large enough.
Yeah.
But I think it's really, it would be so much better if we were thinking about things in that context.
Yeah, and it's like, yeah, I do think the like a persistent problem, and we'll probably talk about this a little bit as we go on to your other questions. Well, I'll let you ask like kind of some of your follow-ups here, or maybe we can answer some of them. But like, there is a little bit of like, oh, we are almost a month into this meta, and it's like, oh, we actually don't even have 2,000 tournament games played yet. So it's like, the data size of Netrunners is pretty small at the moment, so we're never going to have clear answers, I think, in the way that like I would love to do and spend a lot of time doing. And then I think there's been some, I think, like the Markov chain stuff that Lucy created, that you pioneers like a really good tool for looking at stuff that we haven't looked at before. But I agree that like, I mean, for my level, like without archetype level analysis, it is a little bit silly to just do it on an ID level. And I would love to see more, but
Ranked JNet is how we get enough critical data. That is the only way. But
yeah, probably, honestly. But
Yeah.
But yeah, you had some other questions, so I figured I'd let you move on
Yeah.
to your next one. So
Yeah, I mean they're all kind of related. I guess the questions 2 and 3. Um, Generally, I am a relatively newer player, so I haven't been around for the different iterations of tournament types. Double-sided Swiss, etc. Um, whatever other kinds of types there have been. But I have always basically been around for closed Swiss or closed deck list during Swiss, and then open deck list during cut. Um, and I guess just wanted to understand the historical perspective on this,
yeah,
since it does motivate some of my thoughts about well, maybe we should just have open everything, or maybe we should have closed everything, or something like that.
yeah. So that one I can answer very easily. And actually, you had asked a question earlier in your last question that I think we'll probably get to. Actually, yeah, we'll get that's your next question here anyway. So I won't jump the gun on that. The reasoning actually, it's a fairly. I think this dates back to FFG era tournament organizing. The original format for Netrunner tournaments, in addition to being double-sided Swiss, was completely closed deck lists, and so you would never know what your opponent was doing. The problem quickly emerged was, well, people make friends in Netrunner, and like one of the first purposes of a testing group was actually so that if you were a testing group and you had like 5 players show up and 4 of you were doing pretty well, the odds that you would play against everyone that was like in the top half of the tournament by round 3 was actually pretty good. And so if you just had someone take, if you just had each person take notes on what person A was playing and what the unusual or spicy thing was in their deck, you would get like these huge competitive advantages by having friends in the tournament, or just having someone that was a friend and not playing and just wandering around the hall. And so people were kind of like, they didn't like that, and like there was a for a while I think there was an attempt to make a no scouting policy, which just was not enforceable in any kind of way. And so it was sort of, the compromise was, well, Netrunner is a game of hidden information, and so we don't want to, people like being able to surprise their opponents with, unusual bite includes, or playing Oppa research out of HB, or like, if I'm playing OB, you not knowing whether I'm playing an asset OB or a measured response OB or a fast advance OB. Like that is part of the equity of bringing a certain style of decks. And so people, I think, have very long said, well, I want like Netrunner feels like a closed list game to them. But then by the time you get to a cut, it's it's a playing field kind of leveler, where it's like, okay, we don't want to give someone who shows up to their first or second event, doesn't know anyone yet, but is quite good, to be disadvantaged because they don't know enough people to do all that networking they would need to get all the good lists. So that's the like justification between the two.
That makes sense. At least in my mind, I wonder if the kind of implicit metagame of networking and scouting would still maybe exist even in a closed list structure. I've only been to a handful of IRL tournaments, but I'd imagine if you show up with a testing group to one, there's like a lunch break after a you know middle round, and you can just sit and discuss basically everyone you played and all the deck lists that you've seen.
Yeah, I mean, it happens. Absolutely, it still happens. Like, it doesn't solve that problem, but I think the people have generally felt that, on balance, you're trying to get the best of both worlds. You still get that period of being able to surprise your opponent, and then you don't have to worry about putting all the effort into scouting in cut games.
Yeah, and I think if you're doing particularly well in a tournament, then like frequently, you're thinking about top cut, and you're thinking about how, I don't know, you're mostly want to be focused on like your own game, you know, because you know that once you hit top cut, then your deck list will become open, and it even impacts like deck building, right? Like if your goal is to win a tournament, you know that at some point your deck is going to be open list. And I think that that psychology like shouldn't be underestimated. I'm
Okay,
actually
then
like, this logic makes
I
sense
would
to
say
me,
like
but part of me is also just like it's a logistics thing, right? Because
Yeah.
imagine, you have like a 32 person tournament or whatever, having to wrangle people and be like, hey, have your printed deck list out, or hey, you have to have Wi-Fi during Swiss so that you can like review things. Like that to me also seems just like a logistical barrier to entry for open deck lists during Swiss. And you're like, oh well, what about like Worlds? It's like, well, has so many people in it that then it becomes even larger, like logistical nightmare.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's part of it is like historically the TOs and judges are supposed to be the keepers of the lists, so that people can't do something funny and swap out or change the list they're showing to people. And so it's like, well, now a judge has to be able to manage and distribute, if we're talking about Worlds last year, 360 deck lists, and then hand those out to every player at the start of every round for their opponent, kind of thing. And like, it's just not logistically feasible. And it's like, I think we're starting to head towards a world where the software and Wi-Fi is getting like more and more plausible where that happens. But in general, the logistical burden in Swiss is also a major factor there for sure.
okay, yeah, that makes sense, and that's kind of the dimension that I probably hadn't been thinking about and wanted to get to. I think it leads in pretty well to my next question if we're good to go.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I guess we talked about like open deck lists before the start of a tournament. Um, how would y'all feel about basically publishing everything after each tournament? I know there have been a couple of notable cases that come to mind of folks that are kind of like happy to not make the cut in like, let's say a district,
Yeah.
and then they can play the same deck in mega cities, um, and kind of have the same surprise factor there.
Yeah.
I mean, so I think like I would generally be pretty in favor of having more like open deck lists shared at some point, but I do think that we just have to be realistic with um I don't know, like where the community is right now and like what the expectations are around that. So, for example, if I'm on a team with someone else that lives in a different region and their, regional event or whatever, like their big event, maybe not, districts or even mega cities, but like a continental event. Theirs is 1 week beforehand, and then theirs gets published before, my event. That creates these like really weird like tensions and like incentive structures, I feel like. And that's probably something I would want to avoid. So, I mean, I'm just generally in favor of like deck lists for everyone being available. So we could do more data analysis on things. So you could look into things so that, I don't know, just as like clear. And so that way people don't have to, to be like, oh man, like I got 16th in this tournament. I wish I had not made the top cut so my deck list wouldn't be out. Like I'd like to just
Yeah,
generally
or
avoid
like,
that.
oh,
But
I got 16th. Or I got like 15th. I'm gonna drop because I don't think I can win, and I'd like to keep my deck list secret for
yeah,
a run where I can bring a better corp deck to go with my broken runner deck, kind of thing. And like,
yeah, like
I don't know that's happened specifically in reality, but like I do know there is that tension, or the like, oh, can I bring, I have a district, or I have a district locally, but 2 weeks later it's going to be the mega city, and we know like the ban list isn't going to affect this or whatever, right? Like, should I hold back the deck list I've been practicing so that one of my teammates whose mega city is in a little bit can actually get the surprise factor with a deck? I don't know. I will say, like, to me, I sort of think, to me, it's like when the tournament, when Swiss is done, I actually think you should just, like, all deck lists should just be open. I think it's pretty. I don't know that that means they need to all be super, like, aggregated and, like, I wouldn't say published on NRDB, but like, hey, if you wanted to click in through tournaments on Single Games or APR, like, I think you should be able to access people's deck lists that they bring to events. Now, I could see a world where, like, that's me from like a competitive side, where I think it's more interesting to be able to see what people were bringing. There is like a small concern that you could have people like bullying, but part of me is like, well, bullying is probably going to happen either way. But maybe there's a world where it becomes worse, and that would definitely be something I'd want to keep an eye out for. But I also know that like quite a bit of the community, you know, the NRDB is also a community space, right? And it's like, oh, if everyone gets to see lists that won X, 5 days before someone posts on NRDB, do they still get all the accolades and attention and discussion centralization without that? And is that is that trade off worth it?
I think just shooting from the hip proposal here that is coming from someone who is not a part of OP and doesn't have any decision making or sway in this, which makes my life easier, is like, I think it's just like 1 week delay for pretty much everything except for World. I think World should be like after the event's over. For all the people that couldn't make it, just like it's the big event. Like no one's like, oh man, I need to hold my deck list back for after Worlds.
Yeah.
But like I think based off of the size of the event, based off of like, like maybe it's a 2 week delay during Continentals, because usually the online for that region is 2 weeks afterwards or whatever. And so it's like there's just like a different amount of delays. And the 1 week delay would also allow for people to publish their decks naturally and like maintain that NRDB like community thing that you're talking about, where they can be the ones to publish their list and have it be consumed in the way that they want it to be. But then you still have like basically the historical data for whatever data, analytics that you like. And people could go back and like be like, oh, what was this person running during this time? Because I really like their deck building choices and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, the other thing I think, so like a week is reasonable. Maybe it's 2 or 3 days. Like I don't know. Like give people a couple of days. I kind of like the like once the event's done, just for like it's very clean. You don't have to remember. Like no one has to remember anything. It just happens. And I'm sure you could set that up with code too to be in a week. The other thought I had, which is like you could potentially do like a pseudo anonymization where it's like, oh, we're gonna average together all of the like Baz decks and then be like, oh, these cards showed up in Baz decks that were correlated with winning or losing, kind of thing. But I think that ends up being pretty complicated, and you have to make a bunch of like you have to actually make choices in how you analyze data when you start presenting it like that, which now means it's like it loses its ability to actually let other people do other types of analysis when you make a bunch of decisions about how to present and collate data.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense.
But yeah, I don't know. Thanks so much for coming on. We talked about this for a long time because obviously I'm passionate about OP. And I don't expect any policy change from OP immediately, but also be on the lookout to see if there's a survey where we ask your opinion about some of the stuff I say to the people listening to this show generally. But I think I definitely let us go a little bit longer than I meant to. But Spider, any shout outs before we go on to our next set of questions?
Yeah, shout out ATL, shout out Mom, shout out North Carolina districts. See y'all in a couple days. And thanks, Jeff and Safer, for putting out some quality content.
Sick. Great. Well, best of luck at districts, and I hope you guys get great turnout.
All right. Bye, y'all.
Bye. All right, Safer, do you want to read out the next question while I also get our next caller ready?
Yeah. So the next one is from Tony T. He wrote in, last week you mentioned that Seamless might be a mistake because of how it shapes the meta. Are there other cards that have limited the meta/design space you wish you can redesign? And after I have like some answers I thought about before, and then after like reading it for myself, I know immediately actually what the biggest answer for me is right now. That is Buzzsaw. I am so sick of Buzzsaw. Not as a player, but as a designer who tries to make ice that matters for like it's the exact same thing with Cleaver, but on a less bad scale, so it sticks around for longer and I still have to deal with it.
Yeah, I
Which
think
is that
it's yeah.
0 and 3 strength code gates are all the same.
Yeah, it's for spoiler for whenever Andre finishes editing our like 4 hour tier list video for the corpse side. But Buzzsaw came up an awful lot in our conversations. Which yeah, that's a good one. I I think Pinhole is very much in that seamless design where like it shapes the game by being there to a degree where you can't just remove it, but it also probably is a little not. It's probably too good at what it does. So
Yeah, Pinhole is very, very impactful and very relevant, and legitimately I don't it's actually what it does is so complex in the meta that I have little to no confidence in what I think would happen if it was removed. It's the kind of thing where, let's say that it was banned. We might not fully understand the impacts of Pinhole rotating or being banned or whatever for like months,
yeah,
months and months, maybe like year plus. Like, I don't know. Pinhole might have been a design mistake, but it is the game
yeah,
has in fact been kind of balanced and designed around it for such a long
yeah.
time that
Lucy, I can tell you what
really
happens about Pinhole. It's miserable as someone who as the one of the preeminent startup
yeah,
players. Yeah, startup definitely
yeah,
has some issues without Pinhole.
yeah.
I also want to call out, and this one feels like I'm stabbing myself in the back. I think Simulchip is like on that mistake line. It's probably like the least.
Mm,
It's not the most egregious, but like recursion plus economy just turns out to
yeah.
be like so good. Like there was a long time where I was insistent that clone chip was actually better than simulchip, and like boy, I need to go and tell past Jeff that he was just completely wrong, um, and that's okay. Like it's the card does a little bit too much. It's probably like the combination of simulchip Muse and SMC all at the same time is I think a little much
It is.
at times. So
It is. But it's definitely like kind of the sins of simulchip for sure.
yeah,
It's a
and
good shout.
the last one is Nebula, obviously, but.
I don't know. I will throw one other one into the ring, which is price.
Oh,
Price? Like, I don't think it's actually, but like, man, is that card uniquely powerful and results in like really, runners that just want to get to Doomrig stay like immediately or like really
mm-hmm.
heavily accelerate. Like if Max is a design mistake, which I'm not sure Max actually is, but like Max is kind of cracked.
Yeah.
Then like price is like mini Max, you know?
Okay. I I don't think you can get me there, but that's you can have your opinions.
I don't actually think that it's a design mistake. I'm just like cards that come to mind that
Yeah, yeah,
aren't already banned because they're clearly a mistake.
yeah, yeah. There's a lot of we were talking about this one before the show. Be like, yep, that was a mistake, but it's on the ban list now, so we don't have to worry about it. So
Yeah, we don't need to mention Keeling. Like we don't need to worry about Keeling.
yeah. Um, but as we talk about ideal metas and things, Cold Lava had another relevant question on this. It's almost like we had themes today. Cold Lava, do you want to introduce yourself quickly and then hit us with your question?
Hi, I'm Cold Lava. I'm in the Boston meta and I'm in the tiebreakers. My question was, what does your ideal meta look like, and is it reasonably achievable? And for this, I'm going to assume side balance is, let's say, a given. But we've had metas from the extremes of there is one corp deck, there is one runner deck. You learn how to play them against each other, and nothing else is really viable. All the way to the other side, where kind of every week the meta is changing. You have to keep up because maybe it's just kind of like a rock, paper, scissors. If people bring one thing, you have to bring another thing. And there may be some other shifts to this, but what is a good meta, or is it good to stick in any of them for a while? Yeah.
Jeff, do you want to go first?
I
can also go first if you want.
Yeah, why don't you go first on this one?
All right, so obviously for this I have to put player hat on first, and then we can talk about any other hats. But I think for me, when we talk about like a meta game, like the exploration at the beginning of a set is like almost not even like a meta game to me. It's like almost feels like its own separate thing, right? So it's like I really enjoy that time period and it's great, but also like it's defined by the lack of a meta game. So when we're talking about, you know, what are like our preferred meta games to play in, I do want like a little bit of variety. You know, I don't want the what is the thing that gets referenced every single time? It's like Anarch versus NBN, CTM.
Yeah.
Versus...
I was I think I want to say like 2016. That was like 12 CTMs and like 10 Anarchs or something in the top 16. Like,
yeah,
it was like the only thing you
Wizard?
could play.
Or was it a different one? It's probably Wizard, right?
Yeah,
anyway.
Wizard. It was Wizard. It was basically all Wizard with a couple of maxes and a couple of vals.
Yeah. So like I want like a little bit more variety to that, but the specific reason why I want more variety than that is just because like I don't know, like when I go to an event, I don't really want to sit down and play the exact same matchup for like 8, 9, 10 hours or whatever. That's not really the reason why I'm playing Netrunner most of the time. So I want like 3 to 4 different archetypes. I want them to be relatively known, you know, not major surprises, but still enough room for like flair and for players to have like, you know, little influence swap out or like small little tech choices that they use because they want to be better into a specific matchup or a specific playstyle. And then I think the really big thing is that all of these archetypes, their win rates into each other cannot be incredibly skewed. Like I want plus or minus 5% matchup distribution. So I'm going to bring best deck in the quote unquote best deck in the format that's, you know, 55% win rate. But it's a 55% win rate against like the entire field except for a single deck where it's like 45% into. And so, you know, it's the thing to beat and has like a focus on it. And then you can start getting into some of that, like, it's not really tic-tac-toe dynamic, but actually, I was watching.
So,
yeah. I was just gonna finish this out real quick. I was watching a YouTube video from Professor, from the Professor Magic the Gathering. Larian Academy. It was like about how standard is good in Magic, and they were like right now, and they were describing it. It was a recent video, it came out like 2 or 3 weeks ago, maybe something like that. But recommend people watch it if you have a background in Magic, because like what it was described as was like sounded like one of my ideal meta games.
Yeah, I think you described it actually. I had not conceptualized it the way you had, but I think you described exactly what it is, what my ideal meta is to me. I think it's like, I think that idea of like there are a small n, maybe it's 3, maybe it's 4, maybe it's 6, like decks on both sides that have, every deck has a strength and a weakness, but you're not having the rock paper scissors of like, oh, if I pair against this corp, I'm like already 30% to win before I even draw, like before anything happens, like just the nature of how the matchup evolves. So it's like, yeah, having a bunch of decks that are generally in that like 40 to 60 against most decks, and like obviously if you're gonna have that many decks, there's going to be a couple rogue ones that have like more and more disparate kind of results, but they become like metagame calls rather than like rock paper scissors, where it's like, oh, last year there was like, okay, if you were expecting a lot of Alco and you brought the best runner into Alco, you would just lose to Leo because you spent all your tech on Alco. Like half of your deck was Alco tech, and like that I don't think is a great feeling, even though that meta did have a couple of different archetypes you could play on both sides of the table. I think also part of the answer is like, actually you just want a little bit of all of these in different proportions, right? Like having the meta for, actually maybe another way to think about it, like I've been thinking about it's like, oh, the ideal world to me is like, districts like Wild West. There isn't really a meta, right? People are figuring things out. Like actually having a new set come out at the start of districts is like my ideal world, right? Like new set comes out, people are trying new things. We don't have a centralized of like, this is the thing to beat. Like there's maybe a boogeyman from the previous set, but there's all these new tools. You get to mega cities, people start to coalesce around a couple of things, but there's still Wild Westy stuff. By the time you get to Continentals, you've got like, okay, these are sort of the decks. And then Worlds, to me, ideally doesn't have a ban list that's different from Continentals. And it's just saying, okay, everyone knows all of the good stuff. Now you have to pick what you think has the best, like pick the deck that speaks the most to you, you think has the most leverage against the field, and like is just going to like be consistent without being unknown. And I think that like, going from more unknown, more spice to, okay, we're getting closer and closer to defined, but you still have options. You're not just saying, okay, I've just got to make the best version of this. I have 2 to 3 cards lost to choose, and that's like end of list for the entire metagame. Is not definitely like too centralized.
All right, yeah. I guess small add-on. How achievable do you think that is from a design and ban list perspective? I guess.
All right, I have to put on my other. Yeah, I almost got out of it. How achievable is it? I think it's pretty achievable. But like conceptually speaking, but I think that it like it is harder to achieve it right now when the game has changed so much and we're still kind of like I mentioned like it would take us months, maybe like a year plus to understand what the impact is of like a pinhole, ban or rotating or something like that. And I think it's taken us a pretty long time to fully understand Rashida rotating and the influence of centrals, and VP has now come in. I think we're still working on figuring it out and like as a community understanding exactly where things sit. So I think it's achievable, but I think it's actually going to be done through like best practices, and it might take a little bit of time to get to that place. And I think that it's not going to be something that's necessarily like designed for, where it's like, here's this grand plan, this is how we're going to achieve it, and more like, hey, here's the general parameters, here's the indicators of, a healthy meta or a deck that's going to get in the way of that, and then refining things. And I think that, we're more likely to get there in the next month to a year than we are to fail at getting there. Like I think that we're gonna have better metas coming up than we did for the last year.
I'm somewhat optimistic. I think part of me is also to some extent like having, and this is the like a drum I say all the time, is like I think more card releases is also part of the solution here, because every time like ban lists can do some stuff ban lists I think do a nice job of kind of trimming and like helping you identify cards that go way outside the power, but part of the way you bring new decks in is just releasing new cards. And when you're on one annual release, it's pretty tricky to have a meta that doesn't eventually become closer and closer to, you've got 2 choices, optimize them. Or if it truly is that like, you have very polarized matchups, that it becomes rock paper scissors. And like having stuff come out more frequently, doesn't change that underlying dynamic, but it can change how long it takes people to figure out where the optimization points are. But yeah, I don't know. I do think Vantage Point has given a lot more tools to fix some of the underlying long-term issues we've seen over the last couple of years. So I'll be interested to see how this metagame plays out long-term.
Yeah, I think I agree. Vantage Point seems like it's a good spot to be. So thanks for answering my question.
Cool.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for coming on.
Do you have any shout-outs?
Nope.
Nope. No shout-outs.
All right. Well, we are. Should we hit our next text question from
TXP?
Yeah.
All right. So TXP wrote in. Yep. Nope, got it. I never played during FFG's tenure, but got to play a bunch of old cards with the recent quick draft mode on JNet. I found so many cards with trace on them. Understandable. Some of them inherently big traces, some tiny. It felt like a huge design space, and I found myself really digging the mechanic. Makes me sad because I've always heard people nonchalantly mention that's a vestial mechanic. A, please bring it back. B, if you're opposed, can y'all comment on why? Yeah, I'm definitely opposed. I think it's easy to like look at trace and see the positives of it when you're like really entrenched in the community, I guess, and like when you're really familiar with it. As someone who learned the game with trace, like yeah, it's like second nature to me. But it's also really easy to, when you're used to things, undervalue or misunderstand like how I guess incorrectly evaluate how complex a mechanic is to teach for newer players, but also just to like wrap your head around. Like, not all implementation of traces are bad, I will say, but the amount of implementations that trace had within like the FFG era and how it was everywhere, there were just so many times where you might spend 5 minutes in a 30-minute game doing like arithmetic to try to figure out like how the credit totals matter. And it's just like not where you want to be spending your mental energy, like for enjoyment, or at least not how most players want to be spending your mental energy for enjoyment. So yeah, I'm pretty against trace, and I think that there's a lot of lessons to like design lessons to have learned from trace, but part of it is just the whole like back and forth. You have a base strength that can be any number, and it has to be a subscript on a card. And then you have an opportunity to boost it, and then your opponent has a base link that has some cards on it, and you need to figure out all of the different base links. And it could be on the identity, it could be on some cards in their 15 card tableau. And then you have to figure out what the card's actual impact is, and then you can start thinking about the strategic layer of the game. Yeah, I'm fine with it on ScapeNet.
Yeah, it's like there are really good trace designs, and I think sometimes there have been NSG cards that have tried to say, what if we did X without trace, and then it just doesn't work because trace was a core part of the design. But I think most trace cards are not worth the it's not worth the amount of rules overhead, and the amount of times where you do have to do the like, okay, so if they spend this and then I spend this, they'll have this many credits left and I'll have this many credits left, and that means they can do like, there is a lot of arithmetic and math, and it's like, you're not, if we wanted to just do math, we would just play Power Grid, right? Like, we're not playing that kind of heavy Euro game. We're trying to play an interactive, like, swingy game. And like, as you know, Breaker Math already has quite a bit of arithmetic, probably honestly a little bit too much arithmetic in a lot of cases. And so being like, oh yeah, we're going to make even more arithmetic a central mechanic of the game, I think is a little bit, to me, it's a hard sell. I also, as a Shaper player, never had any money, and so hated Trace with a passion, because it was effectively the same as a subroutine, but everyone else who played real decks got to be like, oh, cool, I could just play all of my money cards and break all of your traces. And so that was also an element of it that feels a little bit weird, where it's like Netrunner already had a lot of pressures that just say credits are good, and it just centralizes things even more into credits is the solution to the problem.
Yeah.
So
You mentioned Power Grid, one of my favorite games of all time. I love me doing some arithmetic, but Power Grid has a lot of other interesting things going on, and it's actually a simpler experience than Netrunner. So
yeah, I mean, I
think
like I didn't say that as a knock on Power Grid. I said it as a
I know.
that's not the why someone sits down to play Netrunner, right?
Yes,
So
exactly. And I know not to sit down with some people and play Power Grid just because they're not going to enjoy the amount of arithmetic that they have to do. And I would like to be able to sit down with more people to play Netrunner. Like, I don't want to rule out people just based off of that. And I think, of course, the most egregious example being the fact that you needed an actual mathematical like formula shorthand to figure out punitive math
yeah,
is like the extreme example. But yeah,
yeah,
there are some things that
punitive one
did
of
well.
only two cards in the game where I think having a piece of paper with a chart on it was like reasonable for everyone in the player base to try and calculate what the cards needed to do.
Yeah,
So
but those are the extreme. And there were some cases where trace was fine and even like a positive thing, and it's not unreasonable to like the mechanic.
yeah.
That comes with trade-offs.
All right. Well, we have time for. Well, we technically don't have time, but we're not going to not hit this last question, given that we have the guest on, and these are. I don't know. I'm having a good time still. And lost my thumbs. Thanks for coming on. Could you introduce yourself a little bit and then share your question with us? I thought it was a interesting one to talk about.
Hi, I'm Lost My Thumbs. I play in the Wisconsin meta, also known as Eric with an H. And I guess my question tonight was an NGO front reprint or near print considered for Vantage Point, or do you feel that Charlotte Castador slots into the role well enough that it is not needed? NGO front is one of my favorite cards, and I miss the bluffing playstyle that it enabled in scoring decks.
Well, the simple answer to this is yes and no. That's the simple answer. The answer that you're actually looking for is, I think that for Vantage Point, I don't think it was ever really considered for Vantage Point. It's definitely been talked about at some point, maybe even like for Elevation.
Yeah, I feel like it was in
Where,
discussion for Elevation for quite a while.
yeah, like, I mean, Rashida was also in the conversation for Elevation. It was just a matter of like, do we think that we should do this? What do we think the results are going to be? What's the best case scenario? What's the worst case scenario? And in a lot of also cases, it's like, can we let it breathe for a little bit, see what it's like without it, and then bring it back in some other form? So I think that it made the decision easier when you do have something like Charlotte, where there is a card that can be used as bait and fills definitely not the same role, but a somewhat similar role. I think it's reasonable to like, have NGO be like one of your favorite cards, but I definitely also don't miss needing like someone going install advance and me sitting there going like, I mean, we both know this is NGO and I don't want to have to waste this click to run it, but like I have to also check it because you could just be trying to score out. Imagine like Basalt Spire or something like that. you know
Yeah.
So like I definitely don't miss that kind of dynamic, but I think that concept of putting something into a remote server and it being used as bait and how many advancement counters you put on it being relevant and interesting, like I think that that's like fruitful design space for us to like explore and figure out what that means, maybe even like for multiple factions, and like how each faction could use a different like quote unquote bait card. Um, I'm also just gonna finish this out with like, this is one of the things that Seamless like complicates,
Yeah.
where NGO was relevant and necessary in a world without Seamless because it was really hard. Like you had to have something that was apparently tempo positive and force the runner through through the remote. And in a lot of ways, like decks can just use any card as bait now because Seamless exists, and if Seamless were to go away, then maybe we would all of a sudden feel like, oh man, we're really missing like an NGO. So all this is really complicated, I feel like.
Yeah, I think it's the like I definitely played before Seamless came out and remember being baited by NGO fronts. But as soon as a Seamless launch came out, whenever my opponent install advanced, it was like, oh, that's an NGO front, 100% of the time. And it's like I got punished by making that call so infrequently. Um, it's a little bit weird to me. And I think like part of the NGO play pattern was also like it was pretty common to just install advanced naked because it was still econ efficient to do that. Um, and that feels a little bit like I think the idea of a trap, like a thing to bait the runner into running because I think there's a thing to score there, like it's like that is a fundamental thing in Netrunner that's like just a game mechanic basically, right? Like um, it is one of the draws of Netrunner is that you can make that mind game play. Um, and like NGO was a really I'm gonna call it like a blunt instrument where like yeah you didn't actually like if you could bait the runner that was great, if you couldn't it was still okay. I think Charlotte actually does a pretty reasonable impression of that, but basically everyone just uses Charlotte as a Lacosta like value piece, and that's how the card kind of you know spilled out. Um, So I guess my answer is kind of similar to Saber's. Was like I don't know that it's a effect we need at the moment because the game right now feels like it's like as the corp. If the runner lets me have a card in the remote for a turn, like most good corps right now will find a way to punish you if you don't interact with that because maybe it's an anthill or humanoid resources or it's a 4/2 and they've got seamless launches in hand. Um, but I think the like desire for that play pattern is very like it's a good it's one I agree with. I think that's been still one of my proudest moments was like bluffing. I mean, it was bluffing a Tranquility Home Grid as an Anoetic Void, which is like a whole different thing. But like that element of Netrunner, I think is like it is part of the core. I'm gonna call it the core fantasy, for lack of a better term, of Netrunner, and like having that style effect is a nice thing to have, even if I don't know that NGO front is the right answer for the modern meta that we're in.
I installed Advanced to Charlotte in a game like 2 days ago or something like that to force it to look like a thing, and then just like the very next turn, like flipped it over. Didn't want to draw because HQ was weak, so I didn't even get the additional credit. I just rezzed it, popped it for the 3 credits, and then installed the agenda. So like I think these plays are still like real, if that makes sense. It's just a little bit more subtle, and I feel a lot more clever when doing it with the things that are less apparent.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Any other thoughts on that or questions you have as a follow up? Lost my thumbs.
I guess, yeah. I guess the play pattern that I really enjoyed with it was I started playing in 2023, and the first corp deck that I really fell in love with was a near Earth hub deck that had an equal chance of the card I just double advanced of being a Bologna or being an NGO front, and just like the I didn't really understand the bluffing aspect. Like people had told me, oh, like people have come from a poker background into Netrunner. I didn't really understand like that part of it, besides just, you know, like, oh, is this an Urtica or is this a clearinghouse? But like the interacting with the runner with bluffs that don't just straight out murder them, I find enjoyable.
Mm. So what I'm hearing is like you're like, I want shell games that aren't just killing the runner.
Yeah, like side game is kind of there, but a lot of the times it just becomes a credit tax.
Mm-hmm. I love side games. I'm a side game enjoyer.
Yeah, I played at a Taya deck with the side game guy. What's his name? Adrian. That was
Yeah.
it's always been fun.
Yeah.
Caprice Nisei did nothing wrong.
Yeah. All right. Well, any last shout outs before we let you go?
I guess, yeah, just shout out to the Wisconsin Netrunner scene. I live in Illinois, but I do unfortunately have to hand it to them. And then shout out to my friend Mike for introducing me to Netrunner.
Fantastic. All right. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, this has been a really fun show. I hope everyone tuning in enjoyed it. If you're watching us on YouTube, we're also now available as a podcast. It should be on all of the major podcast platforms now. But if that's not the case, you can ping me, though I can't promise I will act on that super quickly. But the thing I am using to publish it does seem to suggest that it should be available on your podcast catcher of choice. Let's see. Anything Safer you're looking forward to doing? I guess you're looking forward to doing this upcoming weekend.
Well, going to Philly Districts on Saturday. That's
Ooh.
exciting. The other exciting thing is like, I don't know, Pokemon Champions, the release date just got announced. Wait,
Yeah.
I love me a good strategy, another strategy game, and it's like first time I think the Pokemon is going to be like competitive Pokemon is going to be like accessible.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is I don't have to spend 3 fucking hours grinding for a single Pokemon, which is for what it's worth. I never did that because I was like, no,
Yeah.
thank you. So yeah,
Yeah.
I look
I'm
forward
also,
to actually get that.
but I will be interested in checking that out when that does hit. I'm trying to think if I have anything super exciting. I have to start editing the tier list video for the runner side, for elevation or vantage point, and I think I'm also going to be doing lots of Netrunner content these days. So keep an eye out for me appearing on some other stuff too. But yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you all next week.